Welcome to From the Classroom. I'm Nate Quinnell, Superintendent of Schools, and I really appreciate you tuning in to our show. From the Classroom is a show that we shoot on a monthly basis where we take the opportunity to showcase some of the really exciting, great things going on in East Hartford Public Schools. And really want to thank you for all your support to make these things happen. So today, we got a great show for you. So I want to welcome to From the Classroom Elsie Torres. Elsie's our new Assistant Superintendent for Elementary Schools. And Elsie, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate that.
Great to have you here. So,
Nice
Elsie, it feels, I know you've been here for a very short period, but it feels like you've been here for a while because in East Hartford, time moves fast. And say a year here is 7 years other places. So, can you give our viewers a sense of who you are, kind of where you came from, and a quick little, this isn't the interview, you have the job, but can you give us a little sense of you?
Sure. Brand new to East Hartford. I would say I'm just a little over a month in. Loving it here. I love the climate and culture here. I have to say that I've had nothing but positive interactions with everyone from staff to students and families and just the community in general.
Yeah.
So prior to coming here, I was with the Meriden Public Schools for basically my entire career. It was about 16 years or so. And, I'm an elementary person. I taught elementary school. I coached elementary school. I was an administrator at the elementary school. So most of my experience is all K-5 until I left the elementary school level, and then I went into a central office position. So that was really neat because it gave me an opportunity to see the district as a whole, K-12. So I was able to work with administrators across the secondary, dig into the curriculum at the secondary, very specific to second language learners. But I felt like that gave me the perspective that I really felt that I needed. And then when I went back to school, I went to UConn for the Executive Leadership Program. And having been in the position that I was in, while at the same time doing the Executive Leadership Program, it's amazing the mindset shift that I had, because as a building principal, as we know, right, because we were building principals, we have that perspective of our one building. We advocate for that building. That's our job. That's what we were hired to do. Yeah. But having had that global perspective of how like a district operates and runs, and how everything bleeds into one another, and you have to make decisions that inevitably are going to impact one person, but is good for the whole. So that's my background in education, and I'm super happy to be here in this particular position.
Well, we're super happy to have you here. And for those of you at home, East Hartford is a public school. We have 15 schools in the district, and we break our schools apart, elementary and secondary schools. We have 9 elementary schools, one of those being pre-K, ECLC, or Early Child Learning Center. So, Elsie, having you here on the elementary side is a huge asset for us. As you know, my background is secondary education. And, although I've learned a lot about elementary schools over the past 7 years, having someone like you who's been in the fabric of the day in an elementary school, I can't tell you how much we're excited about that. So, coming here into East Hartford, what our viewers should also know is that Elsie was being recruited across the state, and we're just so fortunate to get her here. But what attracted you to East Hartford? Like, why here? And I think you missed to tell our viewers, you went to Meriden Public Schools as well, right?
I did. I was a graduate of Maloney High School in 95. Yeah. And then my daughter's actually a graduate of Platt High School. Okay. So that's...
so deep roots to pull out then, Eric.
Absolutely.
So how did we get you here in East Hartford?
It's a really good question. It is. It's a really good question. I actually had no plans to leave Meriden, to be quite honest with you. There were no plans. I think that my mindset really began to shift when I decided to go back to school as an adult learner. And I did that specifically because of where I was in my life, both personally and professionally. So at that time, my daughter had already graduated from high school. I'm a very stable person. I'm very rooted. I don't like transients. I don't like, as much as possible, I wanted to stay and keep my daughter in one place and, and then expand my horizons and see what doors opened up for me when she graduated and, once she was enrolled in college. Because I felt like it would have a minimal effect on her. Again, didn't have any plans to leave Meriden, but I think that kind of morphed a little bit once I really got into the executive leadership program, started learning all about what was going on across the state, knowing that I absolutely I didn't feel like I would be ready for a superintendency right off the gate, but I was certainly ready to begin having those conversations and seeing what opportunities were out there for me. And so, yeah, so a lot of shifting started to occur.
Yeah.
You know, I was getting phone calls from recruiters across the state,
Yeah.
larger urban districts. And I'd have conversations. I would have conversations with my mentors. I'd have conversations with my family. Had conversations with Bob Villanova, Dr. Bob, Father Bob.
Godfather.
Yeah, the godfather of education. And, you know, but at the end of the day, I always go with my gut.
Yeah.
And I think that, and I know that I mentioned this before, it's not just a job, it's the job.
Yeah.
And so I wouldn't have left unless I really felt that that we were aligned in our vision and mission, that I really felt like I would be a good addition to your team, that you felt that I would be a good addition to your team. I would not have come here unless I felt like I could really impact some positive change and be able to take a deep look, perhaps from an outside perspective, and look at what's really, really working well and some areas that can continue to grow and develop. And through my entry plan, I feel like I've already started to do that in some ways. And also just an opportunity for me to continue to learn and grow. Yeah. I think that's important for me as well, because we're always learners. Always. Yeah. I don't think we ever stop learning.
I hope not.
No.
I hope not. So we're thrilled that that's how this played out, and I know our entire team here in East Hartford is just really happy to have you here. So you've been here for just under a month now, and you've had an opportunity. What I really admire is you've spent some time. Really, I mean, I often during the day I go over to your office to see how you're doing. You're never there, and every time and your assistant says, "Oh, she's in a school," and that we're thrilled to hear, because you're learning about our schools and our kids and our teachers and our principals. And so, what have you learned? What have you learned about East Hartford in the short time you've been here? What have you seen? Anything stick out to you?
A lot. For me, it's really important to be in the schools, because that's where the work is really taking place. And for me, it's equally important for principals and school staff, teachers, personnel to feel supported and to feel like I'm there. And also just to learn, because each school has a different leader, a different leadership style, different number of students, perhaps sometimes slightly different demographics, different initiatives going on. Like we have one school that's an IB school. We have one school that's a STEM academy. We have one school that is still very much an old school community where no buses come in and out. And, you know, we're fortunate enough to be a part of the network, and we're going to go through that planning phase. So why I love to be in the buildings? A, because I love to connect with administrators and teachers, and I love to be around kids. Yeah. And I miss being around kids, because when I was a building principal, any day, like there wasn't a day that I could be stressed out, because I could walk into a kindergarten classroom and immediately turn it around. Yeah. So I miss that, and that's important to me. What's also important to me is understanding the needs of each and every individual school community, and being able to differentiate my approach to meet their needs, and to support the work that they have ahead of them. Because we're all in different places in terms of climate and culture, growth and proficiency, you know, individual goals and objectives that perhaps the principal has for his or her school based on their specific data points. So my way of understanding that is being there, not in sitting in my office.
No. You know, that rings really true with me. And what I've really been excited to hear is we talk to principals and teachers who've had chances to meet you and work with you a little bit. They all say, you know, we love Elsie. Number one, she listens to us, and then number two, she understands what we're saying. And that's a huge compliment. Congratulations on that.
Thank you for sharing that. Thank you.
Looking forward to where that can take us. So I know it's early, but you know, when we talk about some things that are important to you, you know, big goals, big visions, big dreams for our elementary schools. Our parents at home who are watching this, you know, their kids are in these schools. Mm-hmm. You know, when you said, what is your big vision for a school system that we're leading? And you're leading 9 schools, larger than most Connecticut districts. Just our elementary side of the system. What would you say are some big visions or aspirations you have for our schools?
Well, I'll tell you, first and foremost, I think that East Hartford has the potential for absolute greatness. That's the first thing. I think that we have the right people. We have the right leadership across the district and in the buildings. We have such a positive energy in buildings. The one thing I have to say about that, to be quite honest with you, is what's most impressed me about East Hartford is the genuineness in understanding that people are here because they want to be here. Yeah. people really and truly want to be in East Hartford. And when I walk through the buildings and I have conversations with people, it could be a conversation, surface level conversation, it could be a conversation about teaching and learning, it could be a conversation of a challenge that we're grappling with and we're trying to find a solution with. And through those interactions, I see so much potential. East Hartford has already made so many significant gains. Obviously, you've done a fantastic job as a superintendent creating the conditions for all of these things to happen. Well, we have a great team. Yep. And, you know, for all of those reasons, I can envision East Hartford, and of course this is a competitive side of me, you know, really outperforming similar districts across the state, but across all indicators. You know what I mean? Climate and culture in terms of, you know, the safety of how our kids are feeling in our schools. Climate and culture in terms of the feedback that we're getting from our families in terms of the services that we're able to provide for their children. Indicators across student growth and achievement, because at the end of the day, it's our job to make sure that they're safe. It's our job to make sure that they're nurtured, and it's our job to make sure that we are preparing them for the 21st century global technology-rich environment that we live in. Because at the end of the day, you know, I look at some of the kindergartners, K through 5 in my buildings that I'm in charge of and that I feel so passionate about, you know, the leadership in terms of how we can continue to make gains. And some of those students, once they graduate high school, I think about it this way. I'm like, what jobs are going to exist at that time? You know, what skills do we really need to teach our children so that when it's time for their graduation date, that they're prepared for whatever is out there in terms of employment for them, post-secondary opportunities for them. Because I feel like, you know, it's ever changing. You know, years ago, I feel like big changes would happen in a decade, whereas now 5 years is a huge chunk. So I think about the future of our children, and I think about how I can positively impact that and also build the capacity of the folks that I work with and them helping to build my capacity because I want to see our students succeed.
So speaking of that, one of the capacity points that's been important, I know, to you and to me is that we work on a team in East Hartford. So we have a team of principals, we have a team of central office leaders, a team of teachers. And our immediate team consists of facilities and HR and business services. Can you talk to me about what that experience has felt like? Kind of walking in, you know, you and I are coming very much out of the educator track, right? We're both classroom teachers, we're both principals, So what's it like to work in like the business side of education where, you know, finance and personnel all become involved? How's that been?
It's been a learning curve. It really has been because it's easy to, so, you know, we have a group of really, really high-performing people, and we're all coming from our own vantage point. Some similarly, because I have the teaching and learning aspect of it at the elementary, deputy superintendent teaching and learning aspect at the secondary, you, the superintendent, running the entire district, having been a former principal, so still very much teaching and learning. Then we have the special education aspect of it, the facilities, the business. And so it's equally important if we're all going to get to the we approach to understand our different roles and responsibilities and how they all work together to make sure that we're a highly functioning district, you know? And so, you know, sometimes there's a little bit of push and pull, and I can understand that because people are jockeying for what they want,
of course,
you know? But that's been a really interesting learning curve, and I feel like I want to learn, like, you know, I was saying to you earlier, I had spent some time with Ben over at Talon Street, and that was a very significant experience for me because I need to understand how I'm going to work with him as the facilities director to advocate for the work that needs to be done in the schools in terms of capital improvements, or how are we going to improve the conditions for our students, whether it's a door that, you know, is stuck because it's muggy and we want to make sure that all the buildings are safe and secure, you know, or we're prioritizing which classrooms we're going to go into to spruce up, and how I can advocate for that and then message it throughout the 8-9 schools of why we're prioritizing it this way. Like, those things are all really important. And I think that without that level of communication, then we're kind of siloed, and the siloed approach doesn't really work.
No, and I feel like what you're saying is exactly our goal here is to how do we get these gears to work together to drive the system, drive us forward. So for our parents watching tonight or today, you know, you're in the schools. You're at open houses, you're at events. But for some of them, this may be their first chance to meet you.
Yeah.
So, if you had a way to introduce yourself to parents, what would you say to parents? What would you recommend to them as far as their experience with children in schools? What would you like to say to parents if you had something to say to parents?
When I go to the schools and I have opportunities, especially, what I love the most is opening a building with a principal and closing a building with a principal, because that's when I really get to see the entire community, especially at a place like Silver Lane,
right.
Where they all come in to pick up their children and they all drop them off in the morning. And I think that those are really, really rich opportunities to get to know folks. And at least if they don't know who I am, or if they can't necessarily connect the face to the name, they've seen me, and they know that I'm there. And I think the best way to gather information and share information is honestly just through informal conversations. Just talking to people, approaching someone. Hey, how are you? I don't think we've met. What's your name? Oh, who's your child? What grade are they in? What do you like about the school? What do you like about the community? How long have you been here? What experience do you have? What works? What doesn't work? Hey, I'm the new assistant superintendent. What recommendations do you have for me? And just basic things like that opens up a ton of conversations. Tons of conversations.
Yeah, and we love your openness to that. And I know another important part to you is your Hispanic heritage. And I was in your office the other day, and I walked by and I heard you speaking Spanish to I believe a parent on the phone.
Yeah.
Can you tell us about that? That's something that we have a very, very large population. Almost 42% of our district is families that hail from Hispanic descent.
Yeah.
Can you, speaking of that, the example you stand for in that area, can you talk about that a little bit?
Absolutely. We talk about trying to diversify, right? Our staff. I'm not just talking about in East Hartford, but like Connecticut as a whole. All of the the outreach that districts are doing. I mean, specific to ours, we have like one of the most fantastic HR directors who, has connections with everybody, trying to recruit the best and trying to diversify the staff and trying to get some folks in district or across the state that are more representative of the demographic that we serve. For me, it's critically important, and for me, it's a moment of pride that I kind of feel like every mom that I see is me.
Yeah.
And every little girl with olive skin and dark hair is me or my daughter.
Yeah.
And I see myself in the families a lot. And I feel like I'm able to relate and have real conversations, whether it's a cultural conversation or something that they happen to be struggling with, a communication or a language barrier, things like that, And then also understanding second language acquisition. When you're a second language learner, and not just for the children. We have some children that come in and they don't speak the language and they're learning it and they struggle. And sometimes we think that just because children can communicate with us on a surface level, or parents, and have general dialogue, it doesn't necessarily mean that the children can learn in the academic language, because academic vocabulary is critical towards building those comprehension skills. And it's really no different with our families and our parents who have that language barrier. Sometimes there's an intimidation factor there, And I think that it's really important to break that down. And I also think that just the whole cultural competency piece, being able to understand the culture, being able to understand like some of the customs and having those conversations is, for me, I think that I'm able to serve the families very well in that regard, you know. And I'm always happy anytime that I can use like my Spanish and talk to people. And I'm always happy when I walk into classrooms and the kids, they look at me and they're like, "Are you Spanish?" I say, "Yeah, I'm Spanish." "Where are you from?" "I'm from Puerto Rico." "So am I." It's just funny.
Yeah, it is funny. Instant connection.
It's funny,
It's awesome stuff, So you mentioned EL language learners, which we know in East Hartford about 16% of our students are English language learners or speak a different language at home and are working through that obstacle of being able to learn in English. And I'm saying in my mind it's an obstacle, but it's also such an opportunity, because now you have two languages.
It's an opportunity.
And we think about like, as your life advances, your career advances, what that could be worth in dollars. So we certainly don't want to lose that. Can you speak to that at all, of things that work in your experience? I know that's what you did when you were in Meriden Public Schools.
Yeah. It's interesting because, so it's twofold. It's working with the children and then working with the families. And I've always messaged to the families, always speak your native language at home. Yeah. If my parents had stopped speaking their native language at home, I wouldn't be bilingual today. Yeah. I wouldn't have had the benefit of being bilingual. And then with the students, I think that sometimes when they come into a general ed classroom or a bilingual education program or an environment where most of the students don't speak the same language as them, it's almost like their filter is just down. Mm-hmm. And all of a sudden they don't want to speak their language. And I feel like it's so important in terms of the messaging. Be proud of that language. Yeah. Be proud of the fact that you're learning how to speak English, but you can speak Spanish, or you can speak Italian, or you can speak Twi, whatever language it is, because it's a gift.
It's a gift.
It's a gift to be bilingual. Yeah. And it's also important for teachers to understand, and building leaders, best practices on second language acquisition. And really and truly, I mean, in many ways, when you look at it, they're just really good teaching strategies for all students in the classroom. Every student can benefit from those teaching practices.
Yeah. Yeah, unquestionably, and I think, certainly over the past few years, we've had a much larger influx of students who come to us with not speaking English, and it's definitely it's pushed our system to think differently, mm-hmm. and it's enriched our system with students that come to us with all types of backgrounds and beliefs, and I'm so glad that we are finding better ways to continue to serve and come together around those issues. So, watching our show, our grandparents and obviously parents, and of course the kids are locked into this stuff. This is riveting. I think for parents, obviously, facilitating that conversation with their child about school. So I have school-age children at home, and I always ask, how was school? Matter of fact, I asked my kindergarten son yesterday how school was, and he said he had 3 favorite things. I got really excited. I'm like, here it comes. I finally cracked the code. He said, number 1, outdoor recess. I said, wow, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Number 2, indoor recess. And number 3, lunchtime. As far as I
Top
get.
3.
Top 3.
Top 3.
So can you help our parents, or help me, what are some ways that I can get, and obviously we know how important that conversation about what happened at school is, what are some ways we can get our kids talking about those kind of things?
That's a really, really good question. And I was actually having a very similar conversation with Tracy Kane. Yeah. And, oftentimes you ask students, and it goes along with the book study that we did, about the power of moments. We ask our students, what is their favorite thing about school? It's either the 3 things that you said, or music, or art, or in high school, prom, or, at the secondary level, some kind of a sport, right? So all of these moments that resonate with our children, that they take with them. So 9 times out of 10, no offense to the academics, because I love the academics, but they're not going to say that it's writing. Right. Or they're not going to say that it's math. Maybe science. Maybe science, because it's hands-on.
Yeah, I mean, as a former English teacher, I'm dying right now. But I'm with you. I got it.
Hey, I used to teach kids how to read in 1st grade, so it kind of hurts me too. But I think that it really speaks to the traditional style of teaching in a classroom versus the enriching areas that kids really sort of hang on to and respond to when you ask them. Yeah. So for that reason, I think that as a school system, East Hartford and beyond, we have to look at how we're serving our kids and how we're differentiating the instruction and how we're really tapping into cross-curricular connections to be able to teach the content standards, but teaching it in a way that's really engaging to these kids. Yeah. I mean, if kids are learning and they have music and movement, then they might say, hey, you know what, we had a lot of fun today. Yeah. And I remember when I was a classroom teacher, especially in math was always a really good opportunity to engage kids in workstations, and they thought that they were playing, but they're learning. Yeah. They're learning. Yeah. And so I think as educators, being able to kind of like embrace that mentality and then also change with the times. Also look at the students that we have in front of us, because the kids that we have, I grew up back in the 80s. You know what I mean? this was in the 80s.
Yeah.
And now our kids are digital age,
Yeah.
you know. They're very tech savvy. Many of our kids now, the kids that are being born now, they practically have a device in their hand. So we really have to think about how we're modifying and embedding some of those great things that create moments for our students in the classroom.
Yeah. It's so true. It's amazing how different our kids are.
Yeah.
You know, and yet at the end of the day, our kids are so different in what they can do and they do, but they're not so different in what they need. And what they need is what we talk about all the time. They need a caring adult. Mm-hmm. They need someone who invests in them. They need someone who spends time with them. And they really need someone who believes that they can do it. And I think that's where we've worked so hard to blend those things together. So we've hit the most difficult part of this interview, of this discussion. So here it comes. So we're transitioning from school and engaging instruction and leadership to, for our viewers, what's one thing about you that no one would know? What's something surprising, interesting, shocking? Remember, you're on camera.
Not shocking. Well, maybe for some people. I mean, I completely 100% Puerto Rican. Both my parents from Puerto Rico. Both came from the island. I am the only probably vegan Puerto Rican that you'll ever meet. Okay, I don't eat meat. I don't eat animal products. I am like the craziest animal person. Nate, if you and I were, if you were hitching a ride with me and we were going from, like, let's say Pitkin to Mayberry, and there was a stray dog on the road, everything would stop because I'd have to rescue that stray dog. And that's a true story, too, because I do it all the time.
Is that right?
Oh, yes.
All right, that's shocking. That's shocking. I got to process that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I see a stray dog on the street, no matter what I'm doing, I have to stop.
So probably after this interview, I should introduce you to our animal enforcement officer and make sure you got a connection with them and can help that out. That's great to know. I'm glad in our behind our board office, you're going to find out occasionally we find stray cats out there. So I'll have to make sure those days we don't let you near the.
Stray cats are harder because they're feral, you know, and they will tear into your eyes.
Yeah, I don't get too close to them. I try to stay away.
Dogs are a little bit easier. They're easier. Yes.
Well, hey, listen, Elsie, really this has been a lot of fun, and welcome to East Hartford.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming on the show, and looking forward to working together, and hopefully getting into work a little bit further. We can have you back and share some of the things that we've accomplished and done. So thanks so much for coming on.
Thank you.
That's all we got from the classroom. Really appreciate you tuning in, and look forward to seeing you next time.